Aloha and welcome to the Embodied Healing Self podcast with your host, Jen Mons. Each week, join me for soul-inspired, conscious conversations around embodied healing and awakening to your soul's purpose. Thank you for listening in. The content of this podcast is to educate, inspire, and inform you of pathways to an embodied healing self. It is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice from your medical doctor, therapist, registered dietitian, or nutritionist for any questions you may have regarding your diagnosis or condition. Hello, my dear friends. Welcome back to this week's show. So I want to start out by asking you a question around today's topic. Have you ever been in a relationship with someone where you just couldn't communicate clearly? Have you ever felt misunderstood, unseen, or uncomfortable around a particular person in your life? I'm going to guess that everyone on here has felt this way at some point in time. For some of us, it could be our partner, our parents, our siblings, our friends, acquaintances, business partners. But at some point in our life, we come across relationships that I believe when the relationship doesn't come easily, it's always an opportunity for some personal growth. I like to call it my growth edge. And so I'm going to share with you that I had this exact experience just within the last 48 hours. And I'm going to share with you the learnings that came from it and how I navigate it and the insight and the healing that I gained from it through the discomfort and the pain of this particular situation. And I just invite you to notice as you're listening, sensations maybe in your body or thoughts or visions that might come to mind to you and how this might show up in your life. I'm going to share with you my perception of some of the details of the experience, but more importantly, what it brought up in my own personal experience and then how I navigated through it and what the outcome was. We all have core wounds, I'd like to call them. If you've listened to my shows in the past, The Cycle of Self-Sabotage with Bonnie Kelly, Allowing Fear to be the Catalyst for Change with Lloyd Burnett, Doing the Inner Work to Create Your Outer World with Karen Haysbert, Karen Kenny, and Taking Your Story to Your Glory. All of these episodes talk about how we create a perception or a belief around emotional trauma when we are younger, and almost everybody has one. And because we are not able to rationalize a certain situation, say, for example, a young child experiences the divorce of their parents, and perhaps at that time they develop a belief that they are unlovable because maybe the child cannot rationalize why mom or dad would leave the home. Or maybe a child witnessed some verbal or emotional or physical abuse between parents or somewhere else and developed a need or a belief to feel safe at that time. These beliefs come from what I call our wounded or survivor self. So we create a belief in that moment that keeps us safe. It's a survivor tactic. And it serves us for some time. And then at some point in our life, we may recognize this pattern that keeps repeating in different areas of our life. It can show up in our relationship with a partner, in our marriage, with our health, with our children, with our business, with money. But this same belief can create a pattern, which is how I began to discover and see this as I started health coaching many, many years ago, was that I began to realize that most of predominantly women that I worked with, health challenges and issues with food were not about the food. So I began to invest in understanding and training and learning about what the deeper layer of healing that was needed in these women. So the perception of my recent experience is one of a core wound around rejection, and specifically in allowing myself to be supported by women. And I'm also the mother of a 13-year-old daughter right now, and in the middle of just witnessing middle school girl stuff with her right now. And I have to say, for those of you parents out there with middle school daughters, I mean, this is really a thing. Most of you know, I'm sure many of you can relate. It can be heartbreaking. In today's world, everything is done through text messaging or Facebook messaging, which just brings it to a whole nother level where people, including adults, will say things that they may not have the courage to say to somebody's face. So this was the particular situation that happened with me, where in the pursuit of a relationship with a particular group of women seeking to connect in an area where I live, the leader of the group decided that I wasn't a good fit. So this was really interesting for me. And of course, you know, I'm going to honor her request. She has the right to say that, but this is not something that happens very often for me. As I'm going through this experience, I'm noticing that her decision is based on some personal triggers that somehow were created by maybe the work that I do. So here's what I came to after several meditations and journaling. I've developed a very strong relationship with spirit around healing the discomforts and leaning into them and asking grace to show me what it is that needs to be healed in this relationship. Because when we have a miscommunication with another person, it's not really about that person. This particular relationship, it wasn't really about this particular person. This relationship there was not a lot of depth to this relationship anyway, but it was more about, how does this land for me? So how do we notice that we feel in situations in our life or relationships that make us uncomfortable? We cannot change what other people think about us. We cannot even fully understand why they perceive the situation to be a certain way, because when two people have an experience, each person is approaching that experience from their own experiences and their own perception based on their own wounds and their own trauma and their own self-limiting beliefs, blocks, or fears. And this is just the truth. It doesn't make anybody right or wrong, because there is no right or wrong. It doesn't even matter. Everyone has the right to have their own experience. And when we feel the need to be validated or right, then that means we have to make somebody else wrong. So for me in these situations, I immediately go to grace. I ask for support. I just surrender. If I were to stay in my head or in my emotions, which I allow myself to feel them momentarily, and in this particular situation, it was painful to be on the receiving end of very unkind messages when I could not really see what I had done to trigger this. I made requests around clarity and seeking to understand, and also to speak on the phone, but it wasn't received. This particular situation was this person's perception and was not the perception of the people that I knew around me. Usually in this situation, I have a resource for allowing myself to just cleanse myself of the energy. Sometimes I choose to dance, sometimes I go to the ocean, sometimes I take a shower, but I recommend having some type of routine or some type of activity where you can kind of shake the energy off, allow it to move through you, allow the emotional energy to move through you, because what happened is it's triggering an old wound for me. And again, it's not about this person or this particular relationship. It's about how this wound is showing up in my body. What is this showing me about me? What can I work on? Why is this pattern repeating itself? And so I turned to Grace and I asked for support. I asked God and Grace to show me the wound that is being triggered. Show me the belief that I have about this that is being validated in this moment. And this is what Grace showed me, and I'll share with you the levels. If you remember at the beginning of this podcast, I shared that this particular situation revolved around a group of women. Well, I have a core wound around allowing myself to be supported by women. At some point in my life, at a young age, I had an experience where I showed up very courageously as a young girl and was shut down. And even though I knew what I was doing was right, the person that shut me down was somebody that I loved and admired and looked up to. And I was very young. I was 7 years old. And so I began to question what it looked like to be a powerful woman. Is it wrong to be fierce and courageous, even though that's part of my nature? And then as I continued to go in middle school, like many middle school girls, middle school is very difficult. Best friends would become enemies, and it never really made sense, and it doesn't really have to. But I was one of those kids that was very sensitive, and I never really felt good being mean back. Never really felt good for me to make fun of other people. It just wasn't in my nature. Even if somebody were to be mean to me, I just couldn't say it back. So it felt like a lose-lose situation. Like somebody would say something mean to me, I couldn't say anything back. And if I said something mean, it didn't feel good either. And I'm witnessing both of my daughters, 10 and 13, going through the same thing. So those sensitive souls that are listening, you know what this feels like. And so I consciously made a choice at a young age in middle school to become a tomboy. I played on all boys sports teams. I pretty much attended an all-boys college at a federal service academy, 7% women. Then I worked in male-dominated environments as an engineer. And I was comfortable because at some point in time I developed a belief that if I were to stand in my strength and in my power as a woman, that I would be rejected by other women, as I was at a young age. And so I decided to give myself an opportunity to explore that. And so I explored some women's groups, and this particular women's group that I was feeling it out, what Grace showed me is that this deep wound that wanted to be healed around not being seen and being rejected or not being supported by women in my strength, because I chose to show up in this space, this is all subconscious, I didn't know any of this until the last 48 hours when Grace showed this to me. I just assumed that I was just choosing to be brave and leaning into this discomfort of allowing myself to be a part of a women's group that wasn't a vibrational match for me, and was just curious about what it could look like. And because subconsciously there was a wound that wanted to be healed around this, and that was the energy that I brought into the group, it was exactly the energy that removed me from this particular group of women. And so it was very painful because the very thing that I feared is the thing that happened. And it was all miscommunication that to this day I am unable to understand. And sometimes we just have relationships in our life, the reason I share this with you, that are just not a vibrational match. And it's okay. There is nobody that is wrong. People can only meet you where they are. You can only meet people where you are. And in certain situations, for whatever reason, Certain people can be triggered by things that people say or do, which is what happened in this case. This particular person was triggered by my presence. And although it's important to be aware of our presence at all times, it is not our responsibility for other people's perceptions of the experience. And so this was an invitation for Grace to show me that there was still some work to do around this wound. That if I want to allow myself to be supported by women, that it can look differently, that there is not just one way, which I intuitively knew, and that if it's not in alignment, don't do it. And also that there's still some work, some inner work that is calling to be healed around this wound. And what's so interesting to many of us when this happens is that I was in such an open and expansive state when this came, kind of like blindsided, like I got hit by a car, like what? Where did this come from? Because when we're in a really high vibration creating, and it feels really good, and we're open and expansive, as I just was literally the night before up until 3 a.m, just completely downloading information to create new content because I just came back from a trip to Yellowstone and felt so grounded and just felt all of my chakras opening up all the way down to the ground, and I felt so open and so alive. And then boom, like this message comes that makes no sense to me, like clear out of nowhere. I'm completely blindsided. And sometimes this happens. Some of you may be listening that are just like, oh yeah, that happens to me when I feel really great and open. Boom, contraction, an opportunity to go deeper and to grow more. And so I share this with you because we don't have to take these things personally. We don't have to get upset. We don't have to become the victim of somebody else's misunderstanding or our misunderstanding. We don't have to become the victim. We get to choose. And what we can choose is to lean into it and to ask Grace for support. So that's what I did, and that's what I saw. And so what I also do in these situations, because this happened before with family members, I've been doing this work for like 10 years. So it's a practice and a journey. And I share this with you because I think we are always in practice. I think we are always learning more. And the more willing we are to continue to expand, as I am in a constant state of movement and flow, then the more opportunities we get to lean into our growth edge, which this particular situation was for me. But 2 more practices that I use that I love, and this may help you, are to do a meditation with this other person's higher self. This is something that I absolutely love to do. I just love it. When we do a meditation and welcome our own higher self in, we're welcoming complete grace and unconditional love. And when we welcome in the unconditional love and the higher self of the other person, we can actually have a conversation, or allow, I should say, a conversation to take place that might not be possible in the physical world. It might not be possible to be heard or to say what you want to say to this person physically. And that's okay. I want you to know that there's another way. I've practiced this a couple of times. And what this allows us to do is to heal. It allows us to have a conversation from a place of unconditional love, not from a place of fear or protection or anger or sadness, just a place of love, just simply as it is, because that's actually all that each one of us are. And so when we come into that vibration of acceptance and allowance and just surrender to grace, show me what there is to heal, we create space for that conversation. And so then I move into this meditation where I call in my higher self. I see her, I feel her, I hear her. And I ask her if she wants to have a conversation with this particular wound and this calling in this other person's higher self. And I begin to see, sense, and feel a completely different conversation that wasn't able to happen in the physical world. And that is where the truth is. When the conversation is between higher selves and unconditional love. That's where the truth is. It's through grace. All of the work is done through grace. None of our experiences, our own pain, our own triggers, our own trauma is actually really just about our pain in that moment. That's the human condition. It's such a more expansive collective consciousness, all of our experiences, all of our losses, all of the experiences. And you've heard me say that before on previous episodes. And so then sometimes I'm guided to also have a conversation with this person's inner child. It's not something I ask for. It's just something that I just trust to be shown if possible. And what this has allowed me to do, which almost always actually does happen, there's something so innocent about our inner child, and allowing ourselves to trust and be in the space of a person who, before their trauma, before their self-limiting beliefs, but just from a place of pure unconditional love, what it does for us in the situation is that it easily allows us compassion and forgiveness. So the 4 things I do, the first is I cleanse my energy. When I'm on the receiving end of somebody else's sideways emotions, we'll just say that. I also check myself between compassion and truth with self-responsibility. I ask grace for support. What is in this for me to learn about me? Show me the wound. Because I cannot change what another person thinks, sees, or feels, or their perception about the experience. But there is an opportunity for personal growth for me, for us on the receiving end, or on the other end of a miscommunication. And then I go into meditation, asking grace for support, asking to be shown. How did I attract this? What is it that needs to be healed? And by the way, this particular answer can have many, many layers. Mine did. Mine had many layers. 1 was of healthy boundaries. 2 was of being in alignment on a vibrational match. 3 was the desire to be seen. 4 was the need to be supported. 5 was the fear of rejection. And 6, the deepest layer, was trusting my essential goodness. It all came down to trusting my essential goodness, because what I noticed after I'd done the meditations, or as I'm going through the process in the healing, is that some of my conversations would replay in my head. So that was showing up as self-doubt in my own essential goodness. So I'm curious if, and I know that this is one for many of us, really believing in our own essential goodness, really trusting and knowing when we consciously do the best that we can do, that when we are in alignment with grace, when we are responding to a situation from our healthy self, which I believe I am able to do when I go into meditation and stillness and reflection, when I cleanse my energy. And then with that clean energy and that connection to source, I then begin to continue a meditation with higher self. And it's a beautiful journey and experience. And the old me would have replayed a situation over and over again for weeks, possibly on end. Some of you may be able to relate with fixer energy if you're a healer. Those of us that like to fix situations, well, that was me. I mean, I was an engineer in college. I loved to fix things. I loved, troubleshooting and figuring things out, but that's the ego. So allowing myself to let go of the fixer energy, accept things as they are, without judgment, without expectation, without anger or resentment, and just trusting and surrendering in the process, in the experience, is a wonderful gift. And allowing ourselves to learn and ask the questions about how can we move through this, how can we learn from this, is helpful, because that is where we can break the pattern. So in breaking the patterns, the first pattern is awareness. And this was an obvious awareness that somehow probably my higher self called in. And so did this other person's higher self, as an opportunity for a growth edge for both of us. And that's the moment where we get to choose. Are we going to blame the other person and not take self-responsibility? Because if we do, we're not going to learn anything from it. We're just going to keep repeating that pattern. It doesn't really matter if the person is wrong or not. But do we blame the person, or do we take self-responsibility and do the inner work and break the pattern? Awareness of the belief that showed up, that created the pattern. A choice to have compassion and forgive it, which I do through higher self meditation. And then an opportunity to shift the belief, which in this case, I was able to shift my belief in realizing that the very wound or need that was present that took me into this situation was exactly the same experience that I feared would happen was exactly what happened. And so next time I will choose to ask myself before entering a particular group of people or a retreat or anything, a class, is this in alignment? Is this in alignment with me? How does this feel? What am I wanting or seeking in this situation? If it feels relaxing, it's probably in alignment. If it feels effortless, if it feels uncomfortable, which I got to be honest, in this particular situation, my body speaks to me through headaches. I had a headache multiple times around this particular situation. So those were signs I was ignoring. So is my body speaking to me? And just really asking the question, is this in alignment before stepping into a particular situation? And allowing yourself to be guided through grace. So I hope this was helpful for you. I know that we are all going through our own journeys every day. It is a practice. We are all perfectly imperfect. We are just here to navigate the muddy waters of the human condition in this experience in whatever way we can. And there's always an invitation when things get uncomfortable and sticky and muddy to look the other way or to lean into it and allow it to be a growth edge, which some very wonderful gifts can come out of it. And for me, they did. Within hours of cleansing this energy in this relationship, I welcomed in 2 super high vibrational guest speakers for the show, which I'm so excited about. I put in requests 2 months ago, and I just love how energy works, right? You let go of toxic energy, you create space for new energy to come in at a higher vibration. It was just magical. And I invite you to welcome these uncomfortable experiences as an invitation to lean in and to have gratitude for these experiences. So just keep trusting and stay the course. Sending much love to all of you, and aloha. Have a wonderful day. Hello, friends, and thank you so much for joining me today and being a part of this community. I know there are many other podcasts that you could be tuning into, and I am deeply honored that you chose to listen in and be present with me today. I love and cherish and appreciate you, and I want to invite you to join our tribe and Facebook group under jenmons.com/connect. I would also love to gift you your guide to discovering and overcoming the self-limiting beliefs standing in the way of you living in optimal health, more energy, fulfillment, and self-confidence to create an embodied, healthy, whole you. You can find this at jenmons.com/tribe. I also have one small request to help spread the love. In order for this podcast to show up in the feed of social media platforms of other like-minded people, we need reviews. So please head on over to jenmons.com/podcast to leave a review. You will also find other inspiring episodes on that page. So I personally read these reviews weekly and would love to give you a shout out and share your kind words with our listeners. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook as Jen Mons or The Holistic Coach, with a W, holistic, and Jen Mons, JenMons.com. Thank you so much and have an amazing day. Aloha.